Hey everybody, this is Perch. Let's read what this says. This is Perch. I grew up reading comics and playing video games in the 80s and 90s. A lot of us did. There are a bunch of ads in 80s and 90s comic books for video games. The Nintendo and Sega graphics were terrible in old video games, so they'd often use great artists in the ads to make the game look better than it was. There was also a lot of video game-based licensed comics. As soon as games like Mortal Kombat and the consoles like Sony PlayStation came out, the graphics took a huge leap. Comic books panicked. Marvel and DC were terrified of losing the young boy audience to video games. So instead of leaning in on the comic strength of style and cartooning, they acted as though style was bad for business and photorealism and heavy reference would be how they would compete. That's when Alex Ross and Brian Hitch really became the industry standard. Editorial would give out SketchUp models for artists to use in backgrounds. Comics and video games are not, pardon the pun, rivals. They share an audience. There is an incredible opportunity for growth if comics worked with video games instead of trying to compete with a product that is a completely different experience. Video games are struggling, comics are struggling. They should stop competing with each other and work together. Interesting point. And for what it's worth, I'll bet that video games do not think they're competing with comics. I suspect that video games don't think about comics much at all. But otherwise, I think your point is not wrong. I think the only counter I'd have to like Brian Hitch and Alex Ross is I'm not sure that was a conscious decision. Like the one part of your premise, I'm not sure if I agree with, or I'm not sure there's proof of is. Were comic books tuned into the market and where the dollar was going and everything else? Were they tuned in enough to be able to say, hey, let's lean away from style? I'm not sure that was a conscious choice. I agree that they did it. I just don't know that that was something where a bunch of people sat around a table and said, hey, this is where we should go. I think more likely, a couple things happened. I think some of those artists, like you mentioned, like Alex Ross, got popular because, they're like right place at the right time and the work was strong. And so as a result, they got a lot of attention and they were popular. I don't think it was, I don't think the comic publishers selected into that. I think they were really good artists and they hit at a time when, the comics industry needed some good artists and, they dictated the style. Just like, I don't think anybody was really saying, man, we really need a Todd McFarlane when Todd McFarlane jumped onto the scene and then started blowing away people with his heavy stylistic kind of art. I think the industry responded in kind because it was very popular, but I don't think the industry, consciously went for that. I do think that I do completely agree with you that they should work together. I think there's a lot of synergy, and I think, or at least there was. I think that gap is starting to widen. I think video game audience now, kind of the core buyers, a lot of people who are buying, increasingly the crossover with comics, like that Venn diagram of crossover, is starting to separate as comics are going increasingly toward an older audience. Typically an audience that already existed, a collector's audience, where video games are still attracting, in some cases, younger players, in some cases for, more casual games, things like Fortnite, things like Fall Guys or Among Us or whatever, Roblox for younger kids. I think if comic books wanted to be smart, I think they would figure out how to do comic books based on popular Roblox games. Because there's already YA kind of graphic novels on some of these, but do comics based on Roblox games without it feeling like a cheesy tie into Roblox. Like the title of the comic can't be Roblox Presents with like the logo there and like a bunch of like, don't try and redraw in the Roblox animation style. Use those worlds, but do it in an exciting way. I think that there's an opportunity there to get back to kids and kind of build that audience up again. But put it this way, at the very least, they shouldn't be competing. I do agree with you there. And I also agree that comic books, there's a style, but I think the style in comics for art suffers from a lot of things. I think the loss of the inker was a big one. I think the doing everything in digital is another big one. I think that all of these little things have led to frankly cheats. I maintain, and I may be crazy, and you can all say I'm crazy in this, but I maintain that a decent amount of art we're seeing today is traced. It's digital art being done in digital. It's being traced from photo reference, and it is, and you can kind of just tell in a lot of the panels because where I pick up on it is if you look back at the John Romita or Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko or later works of Byrne or or yeah, sorry, George Perez. Why is that name stuck out of my head? Then Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Mike Mignola, Art Adams, Chris Backlund, kind of all these different artists. And actually, I'll even throw another one out. Even people who do really kind of abstract art at times, like a Ben Templesmith. If you look from panel to panel, like pick up a Brett Booth comic and look panel to panel. Look at a Kari Andrews comic and look panel to panel. And you'll notice that the art flows, like the character movement and everything else kind of fits. And if you look at kind of, comics from, more unknown artists or, comics on, like a random artist that they get on Spider-Man or the Avengers, who isn't a bigger name, you'll notice that the panels don't flow. The character movements are different. Sometimes even the height is different. Thor towers over Iron Man in one panel and they're the same height in the next. And all of these things, lead me to strongly believe that it's photo reference. They're using photo reference to do the comic, and when you're tracing that stuff digitally, when you're kind of using that as your model, I think you lose kind of the artistic style of going from page to page. I also think it causes people to draw a little bit more, I won't say hyper realistic, but just more realistic. And because the thing you're doing the photo reference you're using is realistic. And so as a result, I think we're getting washed down, watered down art. And from panel to panel, things don't flow. I've told this to people before, like I believe a lot of the stuff is traced now, particularly from the unknown artists. And I think that's how you could tell. You could just tell from panel to panel how the movement is taking place, the kind of size, and somebody's really muscular in one panel, not in the other. I said, these are all indications to somebody who's like on Google image search looking for, pictures of things that they can then slap onto their tablet and then trace over for the comic. And, so you're getting, you don't have like one photo model for all poses Captain America. You're using just kind of whatever you could find that more or less fits, and then trying to just draw around the differences. And people tell me I'm absolutely crazy, but if you start looking at you look at a lot of comics, I think you will see that this Spider-Man run that they're doing right now. I don't know, some of those issues, like Peter's size and shape and everything else morphs wildly from panel to panel inside the same book, and so I just it's an indicator to me. But anyway, I got a bit aside. Your premise was interesting. That basically, as video games got more, the graphics got better, sharper, and everything else, comic books kind of followed suit by dropping a lot of the stylistic changes by working with that. I don't, you very well may be right. I think I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the reasons of what happened, in addition to the ones I mentioned. I think that makes sense. It is a shame because I do think there's a lot of books out there, a lot of comics where, I think a lot of things would be solved by a very stylistic comic, by art, that looked really good. I think the guy, he's been a prick on Twitter, but Gleb Melnikov, he's got a stylistic, he's got a style to him. It's funny because he's got a style to him like John Byrne has a style, even though Gleb loves to shit on John Byrne. But both of them are more stylistic artists, and I think their stuff's more enjoyable to look at as a result. You look at other artists, and it's just it's bland. So and the artist never makes a name for themselves either that way. I mean, Alex Ross obviously is a name and is amazing. So is Brian Hitch. These guys are awesome in what they do. They earned it. But a lot of the art that is kind of realistic-ish, looks like photo reference, looks like tracing, there's no life to it. It's just cardboard cutout looking characters. But anyway, what do you think? Do you think I'm curious about your thought? Does anybody else think that plays into it? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course. And thanks for listening.